Imagine an AI that can create art, write stories, or even compose music just from a few prompts. It sounds incredible, right? Well, this is the power of generative AI. But while it opens up amazing possibilities, it also brings some challenges with it. How do we make sure that the content it creates isn't toxic or biased? How do we handle issues like plagiarism or even cheating? In today's video, we will break down both the exciting capabilities and challenges of generative AI. Let's dive into what makes this tech so powerful and where it gets tricky. So stick around because you don't want to miss what's coming next.
The generative AI capabilities, and more importantly, and equally importantly, I would rather say the challenges associated. Right. So, what kind of capabilities Gen AI comes with, and what kind of challenges are associated? Let us just discuss this thing a bit more comparatively. Okay, that way you will never forget it, I feel. Okay, for example, let me just put capabilities on one end. And let's just put the challenges on the other. Okay. So, team, we have seen capabilities of generative AI. We have used it. We have seen it in and out. Let me just ask you this question. What do you think are the capabilities of generative AI? Let's just think it through. Okay, because if this comes from you, no, believe me, you will never forget it. Just put kind of some thought to it. Just think a bit about it. What kind of capabilities do you think generative AI brings to the table? Because of which it has become so popular and kind of becoming so useful. Think about an tool like Chat GPT. So, team, if I just want to put it in a lot technical words, okay, the capabilities of generative AI, okay, it can be attributed to like one of them is very important one is simplicity, isn't it? The simplistic UI or the simplistic way with which you can get the answers. Think about if you had to do a program for getting an answer from the system. Think about if you had to put some commands there to get the answer. Now you're using natural language processing, right? You're using your English language and your machine is understanding your English language. Believe me, it's not a simple thing. Team, I mean, we have reached to a point right now that we are talking to Siri, we are talking to Alexa in our own languages. Believe me, it's not a simple thing. I mean, there has been effort year long and decades of centuries, if not of century of effort that our researchers and our rather scientists they have, or rather our inventors, they have kind of put in, right? That the machines are able to understand your own language and then yeah, even answering it in your own language. Believe me, the simplicity that it is bringing in, there's no match for that. Second, you can say responsiveness, right? The way and the quickness with which they respond. And I hope you can all agree, right? Just think about, I mean, remember the back in the times when we had, I mean, if you had ever seen the images, no? The kind of computers that we used to have were rooms long. In fact, there used to be the very first beginning of the computers. You might know that there literally was a computer that was kind of split in four compartments, and each compartment kind of used to be housing in one room. And what kind of application, what kind of predictions, not even predictions, what kind of calculations would it do is addition of two numbers. So we have traversed, we have uh, kind of basically accomplished, or rather we have achieved, or we have been through a long journey from there to here on. Right. So the kind of responsiveness that it is bringing in, the kind of quickness with which you are getting your responses, right, for the complex queries when you put in, isn't it? What kind of queries you are putting in, the quickness with which you are getting responded, right? That as well is one really big capability we can say. Another thing which I'm sure you can all agree to is the adaptability. And adaptability. Basically, what it means is, we have seen our generative AI models adapting to different use cases, right? Different kinds of applications, different kinds of tasks, different kinds of use cases. Even you can adapt them for your own company specific data if required by, for example, making use of RAG like frameworks. So the idea here is that the adaptability of your foundation models or your generative AI models, right? That is one really important capability, or rather, the feature of it. Another thing, in fact, these are all things I'm just putting it technically. You have already told it in the what it is bringing in, as you told me as well, is the creativity, right? So if you remember the very beginning of our generative AI sessions, the very thing that we discussed is that over the time from where we started off, right, artificial intelligence, we said machine learning, deep learning, right? And now we are to a point where we are generating the content. We are creating the content now, not just inferring, not just predicting, not just putting out the data that it is already there just like that, but kind of creative, being creative and creating the content. That's what is the value that generative AI is bringing. Right. Also, you can see now that with the advent of things like RAG, things like knowledge bases, things like word embeddings, we are also getting personalized responses. I would rather say personalization. Right. So the generative AI are becoming more and more. You see, your Alexas, your Siris, I mean, the Geminis, your assistants, Apple Assistant, I mean, Apple Intelligence, I believe, what's they're calling right now in iOS 18. The idea behind that is, you see, we are trying to make it as personalized with the even by providing your own specific data, specific controlling or creating your own specific assistants. Right. So we are extending the capability from being more general to being more specific or to being more personal. Right. And that's what I mean. I know, and you already know how rather how big of a part these systems have become. Not again, yes, there are cons to it. I'm going to discuss that on the right hand side. But how well integrated they are, or how well they have gotten uh, into our lives. And you see, with the automations and all the setup that you've done in your homes right now, you cannot think your life without. I mean, it will be, I mean, it is not impossible. We have been, I mean, doing the things on our own over the years. Now, with some recent years, we are setting up these automations and everything. But again, you see, it will become difficult if you take away these tools, these personalized tools uh, from your day-to-day life. Right. Another thing, team, I would like to mention here is the scalability as well. The team, again, there is a lot to do with the infrastructures and the overall evolution that we've had in recent times with the hardware as well. So it was not possible, even though you see the softwares have been uh, evolving over the time, unless you have a capable hardware as well to host or to support that software. Uh, it was not possible earlier. Okay. But today, you see, the evolution or the kind of advancements that have happened in the field of hardware and software both, the kind of scalability that's possible today, which was not earlier. You see, earlier the companies, they were using their own data centers. right? Today you are moving on cloud. There is no virtual limit on how much capacity can you have, right? So scalability with the advent of cloud and with the adoption of cloud and similar systems has made these generative AI tools and applications and platforms lot more comprehensive, a lot more usable, and a lot more adaptive. Right. So yes, these are certain capabilities, or these are certain features, or these are certain benefits that generative AI comes with. The challenges that are posed by these generative AI models, most of them you will see that they can be curtailed, or most of them they can be controlled by by curating, by scrutinizing, or by supervising. Rather, you can see the data. Okay, but yeah, let me just put forth the kind of challenges it is potentially threatening us with. Okay, one of them are the regulatory violations. Now, team, again, there's one thing I like to mention here. In fact, we'll be discussing that in detail in just some time as well. But remember that, you see, what is discriminatory, what is offensive, what is inappropriate can be relative. I hope you do agree, right? Because we live in a world where we have diverse set of people, we have different kinds of cultures, we have different kinds of beliefs, right, that we all live with. So in a particular culture, in a particular environment, what may be considered appropriate might not be considered appropriate in other place. So that poses a lot bigger challenge at times, because when you are making these tools global, there it becomes really important the kind of uh, answers, the kind of predictions, the kind of information your model will put out in that particular scenario, in that particular situation, right? So you see, that has become a lot bigger challenge. Yes, regulatory violations can happen in terms of what is the regulatory compliance in a particular territory. That's what I was suggesting. Might not be the same for a lot open society, right? There it might be something that could be considered as a right for information, right to information, or kind of right to, rather you can say, data, right? At times for a particular culture, it might be offensive, right? So regulatory violation, why I'm discussing this is regulatory violation from a company perspective, for a country perspective, for a territory perspective, for the culture perspective can differ. But again, there's this risk, right? That it might not comply with the regulatory compliance or governance that a company might have set. So you have to take care of it. Second, now take a bit more from a society point of view, societal point of view. So social risks are there as well. Like I've just told, that something that's appropriate for a particular society, for a particular culture, may not be for another. So taking into consideration this aspect uh, is as well important. Now, one common aspect that is out there is data security and privacy. Now, this is common for all, because you see the kind of data that has been fed in the future, we never know that your confidential, your private data may be your bank information, may be a information regarding your I mean unique identity that you carry in your territory, right? So these things, you see, if your generative AI starts to use against you, breaching your privacy in any way, is a big concern. In fact, we'll be discussing this aspect a bit more in just some time. But just be aware, team. This is another problem. Now, there are certain terms. I'll discuss those in detail in just some time. In fact, that's what we'll be discussing very first. One of them is toxicity. We'll see what that in a minute. Another one that these models they do pose a challenge of is hallucinations. I'll tell you what exactly those are. And team, it is important that you know these, okay, going into the exam. These terms are really, really important, and you will see those coming in a lot with when you're dealing with generative AI or machine learning models. Okay, so you have to be aware of it. That's what I'll be discussing with you in a minute. Another thing is the non-deterministic nature. Now, what is this? So, if you remember, while we were discussing Bedrock, I had put a query. Let's just give me an image of a scientist. When I do the when I did that query, that particular model gave me a particular image, right, of a person who was looking like a physicist or the doctor, like we asked for. But if I run the same query again, you can receive another image altogether. That has a lot to do with the way it processes your queries, right? It will look for the probabilities and everything in the backend, and the temperature, P, K, and all of that, the randomness it brings in and everything, the seed value that it uses. Again, the technicalities are all there, but the idea is that team that you will get different responses for same queries at times, and in fact, for most of the times. This is what is we refer to as a non-deterministic nature of your models, which poses a big threat to the compliance and governance, as we'll see further. Because you cannot audit, you cannot trust your model for a particular response. It can change the response for the same query if you ask it again. Right? So that is posing a big issue going further. Another thing, or the last thing I would rather say, is plagiarism. Plagiarism and cheating. Now we'll discuss what these aspects are in just a minute. But just be aware, team. Now, team, let's just discuss few of the challenges like I told a while back. One of them is toxicity. What is toxicity? Now, as the name itself has it, you must have already guessed it, what it does. Here, you get a content that's offensive or inappropriate, or it can be uh, disturbing. Now, team, try to understand the thing here. So the idea here is that toxicity indicates what is toxicity. Defining that itself is a big problem, or it's a big challenge. I'm telling you that, okay, for toxicity, the general definition is like anything offensive, inappropriate, disturbing, I mean, kind of anything discriminatory, rather. That we can refer to it as of a toxic content or toxicity. But defining that as well is a big challenge. Because you see, what is toxic? I mean, I have discussed that with you already. What is toxic or what is inappropriate in a particular context or in a particular situation or a particular culture or a territory or a could be entirely relative. Right? So in these machine learning models, now this has become a lot bigger challenge is to define what is toxic and what is or what should be censored. Okay, so is it really toxic? Or is it something that may not be toxic, but the the law of the land, the rule of the land suggests that it is inappropriate. Right. So toxic, there is no basically specific boundary that can define what is toxicity, but just get an idea, team, going into the exam. Is anything that's offensive, disturbing, inappropriate could be considered as a toxic content that your model is generating. Okay. Now, it could be something like, again, I really don't want to put out any example because you see that, I mean, like I've told you, it can offend anything or anyone, right? But basically, you, let's just say you are the user and you are asking generative AI a particular question, and it is responding in a way that offends you. It responds in a way that can disturb you. It responds in a way that you feel is inappropriate. Like you asked your model that, okay, tell me or show me an image of a of a scientist, right? And every now and then your model is coming out with or coming up with a male scientist. Just giving an example. It's offensive to a woman who has asked that question, right? Because we have had fantastic and we have had brilliant minds who were females and done exceptional job in invention and researching and rather the field of the kind of inventions that we've had over the time, right? So this is what I'm just giving a very soft example, but I hope you have got the idea what I mean by that. Okay, a model giving out anything that's offensive or disturbing or inappropriate, that is toxicity a model can have, and that has a lot to do with basically how you have trained your model. Just like, let's just say your child or your kid, just a simple analogy, your kid is uh, kind of swearing, right, to the elders, or even, I mean, swearing out is not even considered a good thing, right, to anyone for that matter. So why is that happen? Might be that you yourself, while discussing with your friends or someone uh, around, might have used those words that your kid has taken up. Same goes with your model. Is the kind of data that you have fed it with or the kind of data that you have trained it with has a lot to do with this toxicity. Okay, so how we can, or what is the remedy of that? Not remedy, I would rather say, but how you can mitigate. Mitigation. What is the mitigation around it? Okay, is curating your data, the data that you have trained your model with, right? So how can it curate your data, by the way, where you can identify, remove the offensive phrases. You can put out guardrails. We have discussed what they are, right? So that your model itself will detect and filter out the the offensive or toxic content, right? So team, toxicity, remember, so with the guardrail, you can define in your model that, okay, if this particular phrase is there, please don't use it. Or if this kind of particular question is there from the user which is using these kind of words, please respond back that basically you can respond it in any way that you want, suggesting that it's not appropriate, or while answering as well for certain questions which are used with those kind of words and those that kind of information, you can put a guardrail to filter out such offensive words from the answer, even though your user might have asked you with that, with on the same way. On the same line, team, again, there are certain things. I mean, these are few things that can be overlapping a bit, okay? But still, I just try to make sure to give you as much differentiation as possible. The second thing that we have here is hallucinations. Now, what is hallucination? And team, you have to be aware of it, okay? These words, because these are the terms that are really or very much associated with the machine learning models or generative AI models, rather, a lot. Okay, so it's important that you know what they are. So, what is hallucination from the generative AI model? Or any model for that matter, machine learning model. Okay, it indicates assertions or claims or the output of any kind that sounds true but incorrect. Okay, so team, you see what happens at times is your generative AI model is very much confident about certain answers, but they are entirely incorrect. And this happens a lot. And this, in fact, leads to kind of a scenario or kind of a answer or the kind of a fact which is not even existing in the world. You see, it gives out certain kind of content or it gives out certain kind of facts confidently. If you ask something to it that does not exist at all. Now, these hallucinations are very common. In fact, let me just show you a bit. False positives. Okay, right. Right. So, just to give an idea, you see, there's this concept we call it next word probability sampling. Now, I don't see, I mean, a guide to language model sampling in. See, I mean, this is what I meant. Next word prediction in the machine learning or LLMs, how it happens is for each next token prediction, the model outputs a probability distribution over its vocabulary, and it will output high probable answers over there. And at times, what happens is, even though they are highly probable, does not make it correct. Just try to understand what I'm saying. Right? So, at times, a particular highly probable word, for example, if you remember, we had taken up an example, right, earlier, that what dog is to, sorry, what I think the example was like, do you remember what was that example? The dog and kitten, I think the dog and cat example that we had taken, right? So in that example, if you remember, in that kitten and puppy example, there were probable answers, right? If you remember that were figured out. Yes, it went with the highest probable one, and that went out to be correct. But not all the times the prediction might go well. And in fact, as Shalu was saying, exactly if you remember, for one of the example that while we were discussing about that letter, no, the letter that was coming in from the CEO's address that we had used it for our example, right? And in that letter, if you remember, it was saying that the address was done by Jeff Bezos. While during that year, Jeff Bezos was not the CEO of Amazon, and otherwise it was the Andy Jassy. Now, these kind of assumptions at times your model makes depending on or based on the data that it has, which might not be entirely correct factually. Okay, so that's when it's important that we as a user we know, or it's important, or what is the mitigation behind it. The mitigation, you see, we are trying to make sure that our models will answer as correctly as possible, isn't it? But at times the parameters that you choose, isn't it? If you remember, we have seen, right, in the bedrock that I can control the diversity and kind of randomness of my answers. Now, if you go for more creativity, yes, it will give you the best of it, but still can have some factually wrong answers. Yes, as we have seen that if you require a very correct answers, you should go with a pinpoint or rather the parameters, the accordingly. But again, that can bring down the creativity in your answer as well, right? So there is a trade-off that you will always have of this kind. If you're looking for specific answers, pinpoint answers, or rather factually very correct answers, you might not be able to incorporate as much accuracy over there. At times, on the other way around, that's again vice versa true. So these trade-offs will always be there. Yes, we will always try to make sure that the models will always answer the best to the best of their knowledge. But again, that is to the best of their knowledge. If you have not provided it with the actual or the factual data of that particular scenario, it can answer this in a wrong way. That's where, team, the mitigation is, yes, one thing is we'll make sure to put as much data as possible. That's not practically always possible, right? So one thing that you can do as a user, or one thing that we can be doing for this hallucination purpose, is that we have to educate our users, the users of this, because you see how much reliant we have become on the data that is being generated by these chat GPTs and everything. So we have to educate our users that, okay, the model is generating the response to it the best of its knowledge. But again, it's to the best of its knowledge. You cannot trust it entirely. You have to check it for the data that's been generated. The verification of the content is pretty much important. Verification of the content, that's pretty much important in order to make sure that the content that's been generated, it's with the independent sources, for example. Okay, not just one, we can check it with other sources and make sure that what data that it is generating, it is appropriate and it's correct. Okay, so in fact, there are tools, right, as well, that are available. We can we can make sure from the training end as well, that make sure to provide as latest data as possible, as correct data as possible. But practically, if you see that what is latest and to what extent it can be latest has some limitations, because the training your machine learning models or foundation models is not as continuous job as I mean, it's not entirely a continuous job as of now. Yes, we are training it to the best of our knowledge and to the extent to what it can be possible. But in a real world scenario, still we have the constraints from the hardware level, we have the constraints of the rather the practical implications of that will still we are still not doing it in a real world, or rather on a real time basis, where we can make our model aware of each and every fact. Okay, so the one thing that we can only do here is to make sure that we as a user, however much you are confident that ChatGPT will give you the right answer, still it's our responsibility to make sure that uh, it does basically we verify the facts. Okay, another thing that's a big problem you will see is in terms of plagiarism. Sorry, I spelled it. Plagiarism and cheating. You know, our school going kids, they are able to generate the essays from the chat GPTs. You know, the college teens now, they are using the chat GPT to kind of perform and kind of write the answers to their questions, right? You know, our job applicants, they are writing the applications with the chat GPTs, they are writing their emails with the chat GPTs, which can give an entirely different impression of a person than what actually the person is from the job perspective. From the education perspective, it can give the teacher or the evaluator an idea or kind of an impression that the student has actually written those things on his or her own, right? And kind of assume that that student has understood those concepts and have put some efforts doing that, right? So team, and plagiarism, that's an entirely different thing altogether, wherein when you're providing so much of data, ChatGPT is not worrying on whether it is taking up a data that's copyright protected. If you provided the model with the data, it is literally using it without hesitating at all, isn't it? So the aspects in the plagiarism and cheating, okay, they are kind of growing exponentially, right? Again, there are debates. I know there are. There can be entire debates on what is right and what is wrong. But still, Tim, you see, in a longer run, you don't want your kid to, basically do everything using the Chat GPT and not using their brains at all, right? You know the cons of that. Yes, we are using these tools to complement the things that are not adding any value or that are not developing or kind of helping us in any way. But if you go beyond that and if you use them as I mean, being a procrastinator and using them as a way out from putting your own efforts and bringing your own creativity and basically at places like interviews and job roles and all, if you're using them, they will be considered as cheating, you know? So the idea is that again, it's a controversial topic, whether should be used as accepted as these tools for these tasks and or not. But yes, team, remember, and I hope you do agree that cheating, it will be considered as a cheating for sure. Maybe for educational purpose, maybe in a job role that you're going for, right? And for example, as we said, the plagiarism point of view, the illicit copying is again another concern. Okay, the model is not even hesitating at all using the data as is. Okay, so the idea of this team, in fact, I'll tell you one more problem with this illicit copying as well is that it will be difficult to trace the data of it because your model will be using its own information as well to add in. In fact, there are tools, again, I don't want to kind of highlight that, but again, there are tools that can bypass or kind of make sure that even the data that it has used, it will rearrange it in a way that no one can claim that it has used the copyrighted material or copyrighted or intellectual property is at stake. That's what I'm saying. Okay, because you see, the models, they are so intelligent that you will never know. In fact, even if you read it, you will not know that it has used your data in order to uh, kind of put out this essay or put out this particular article for another person. Right? That's how brilliant and that's how intelligent they are becoming over the time. Okay, so team, try to understand there are pros and cons of it, but it's important that we handle or we use these tools responsibly. That's what the idea is. And the last point, team, before over here is prompt misuse. Now, this is one thing that we have discussed earlier as well. Okay, when we were discussing prompting, I told you there that this is one thing that we'll have a dedicated discussion on. Okay, so prompt misuse is again a big issue because the way you interact with this foundation models is essentially through the prompts, right? You're interacting them with your natural language prompts. So the way you prompt it as well can be dangerous because your models are like, you see, they carry entire set of information, right? Yes, you are putting the guardrails there just to filter out the offensive and inappropriate content. Yes, you are making sure that your models are not giving out any wrong answers or inappropriate answers or offensive answers and toxic answers in any way. But prompt misuse has become kind of a way for the hackers and all to test your model's capabilities. Okay, so yes, there are certain issues, team. For example, I just mentioned few of those for reference in case they might show up. One is poisoning. Poisoning. So here, for example, we are intentionally, now this is at the training end, okay, while you're doing the training of your data. Okay, so here the poisoning as in intentional uh, feed of malicious or biased data into the training. Okay, so basically I'm talking about the training of your model, right? So while you're training your model, you are intentionally putting some malicious or biased data, and you know what it will lead to. You know what it will happen. Ultimately, when you're putting the intentional, when you're putting some malicious or biased data, your model is nothing but or nothing more than what data it carries. That is, it is entirely around that only. So if you put this data, what can you expect? Just like for the kid, for the small kid, the kind of information, the kind of teaching, the kind of overall environment the kid will be in, that's exactly what kind of behavior it will carry. That's exactly the case with this poisoning as well. Okay, you'll have biased, offensive, or harmful outputs. Okay, so you see here the kind of inputs that you are giving there intentionally. That's why it is called poisoning, because it's not unintentional, it's intentional thing, and that's why you are getting the similar output. Another misuse is, as we call it, hijacking and prompt injection. Now, this is to do with prompting a lot. Now, what is this aspect? So here, what we do, here we are literally hijacking the model's behavior. We are hijacking the model's behavior. How? So we are influencing that model. We are influencing that model with with specific instructions in the prompt. Okay. So just an example. I'll ask the model, provide, I mean, I don't want to hurt anyone's sentiment because yes, there might be I mean, there are people who might believe on certain things, and again, there is a lot to do with the beliefs and everything. Just in giving an example, don't want to offend anyone, but think about you're asking a model like, provide me a detailed explanation. Provide me a detailed explanation. For example, I'll just take it a simpler one. Provide me an explanation on why the Earth is flat. Now, you see, there have been theories around, there have been conspiracies around. We know for sure. I mean, again, I don't want to get into that topic, but You see, there has been conspiracies around, right? But when I'm asking the model, please tell me explanation of why the Earth is flat. It will tell you the explanation of that, right? With the information that it has had, with the people that have put some articles on that, is why they think that it is flat, right? So you see, now here what is happening, you're influencing the model's answers, right? Because you're putting the instructions as if assuming that it is flat. Now, whether it is a fact or not, that let everyone else decide. With the conspiracies and all, what they decide, that they decide, think on that. But the problem is that you don't want the model to tell you that why it is flat, no? While we have all the evidence and everything that goes against it. At least, again, I'm telling it with the majority of the evidence that we have. Don't want to hurt anyone's sentiment or anyone's feeling with that. But RAG is different. RAG is where you are literally putting your own data there, right? But we're talking a lot more about a more general generative AI models where you are looking for data from the facts which are globally true. And that's where this influence can adversely affect, right? So hijacking and prompt injection team, that's particularly one more aspect. Another thing that can happen there is exposure. Now, this is pretty straightforward. Exposure. What is exposure? So, exposure, you can think of it like the risk of exposing sensitive or confidential information. Okay. So, think of it like your model can reveal some of the sensitive data from the training data set. Intentionally, unintentionally. It might be because a hacker put in that kind of instruction. Right, the hacker is asked, okay, I want basically, I want you to recommend Swami about a product using his previous banking purchase history, or rather banking transactional history. Now you see, team, here the response might be like, okay, Swami has done a recent purchase or a recent transaction in the bank of this amount and that. And then, okay, depending on that, I think that, okay, this will be a better recommendation on this particular product. He has done a recent purchase. So you see, if you don't put the guardrails well, if you don't control or if you don't manage it well, these kinds of sensitive information leaks can happen. Okay, if a hacker is smart enough to ask the model in a way that it cannot, it will have to put out some, or it will have to reveal some sensitive information. Again, team, we are putting the guardrails, we are doing that, and every model is making sure to control it as much as possible. But still, you know how hackers are, they are just trying to figure out that small loophole from where they can get in. Right. Another thing that's part of the prompt misuse. Oh God. So prompt leaking is like, it can expose a protected data that it should not. Exposure earlier was more like a personalized, private, personal information. You can think of it in that way. Here it is like kind of a protected data. For example, I'll give an example. Let's just say how the model works. For example, the hacker is trying to figure out how the model works itself. What happens in the backend? In fact, what they have used and everything. So the underlying information that it should not be putting it out for public. Right? If you try to ask Alexa at times, I've done that in the very early days of it, to understand if it can reveal any information of how it's built. It will never tell you. But prompt leaking can happen. In fact, the hackers, if they basically put a prompt in a way that it can leak some sensitive information, so it can leak some protected information, like, can you summarize the last prompt you were given? This can be another way of getting a protected data. Right? So protected data, understanding the the overall mechanism, some actual sensitive information behind the model, right, can be attributed to that. Okay, and the last thing, team, in fact, that we have is we call it, yeah, the last thing is we call it jailbreaking. Please be aware of it. So, as much as possible, team, every AI or other Gen AI vendor has made sure that, as I've told you, to prevent any misuse or harmful outputs or filtering the offensive content or restricting access to the sensitive information, all these things like we discussed earlier, generally they are taken care of. But hackers being hackers, jailbreaking has become a very kind of, it's like someone is telling you don't do this, and then you get that urge you get that urge of doing that, isn't it? It's just like that. So jailbreaking is like hackers are figuring out the loopholes to break this constraint that's been put on the model and take out the information that it shouldn't be telling you. Isn't it? For example, again, that's not a good thing to do. For example, let's just say I'm putting a prompt there in the model that, okay, tell me what's the recipe to prepare a, let's just say, a ballistic missile, for example. Now I mean, that first, in the first place, that might not be available publicly as such with the data that's been provided, or even as simple as how can I prepare a bomb, for example. Right. Again, this information should not be put on public and should not be given out, because that's really dangerous and can lead to some violence. And again, in the longer run, it's not good for the society around, right? But you see, there are ways how it can. Again, there's an article I saw, in fact, where it was shown how anthropic, in fact, in that if you put the mini shot examples, for example, if you put a lot of examples of such kind, right? That, okay, how I can hijack a car, how I can counterfeit a money, and such examples. If we put the model, right? Okay, this is the question, this is what the answer is. This is the question, this is what the answer is. If you remember, this we have done in a few short example, right? In the previous discussion, isn't it? So the models can be tricked into answering certain questions as well. Okay, there was an incident that happened before wherein mini shot prompting was used, where such dangerous or such rather inappropriate questions and answers were provided to the model. A mini shot, as we call it, like a lot of such examples and answers were provided. And at the end of it, the person asked for the question that he wanted the answer of, and literally the model did answer. In the few shot, like with the few examples, it did not answer. But when the hijacker gave a lot of such examples and gave answers to a lot of such questions itself in the mini shot example, then when it at the end it asked it that, okay, now tell me the recipe of doing this, literally the model did answer. Okay, so team, there have been the attempts of jailbreaking. There are going to be in the future as well. It's upon the vendors, it's upon the creators like us to make sure that our model is robust. We have made sure that our model is not leaking out, or it is not putting out any of such information, and such jailbreaking attempts, okay, they are not successful.
Thank you so much for staying with us till the end of the video. Now all you have to do is just click the link in the description below, or if you are just starting out, just type k21academy.com/AWSAIML02. Now, in this page you can enter your name, enter email ID, enter phone number, and click on book your free seat now. Then you will be taken to a thank you page. Now you can add this session to your Google Calendar or Apple Calendar. And I promise this is something that you don't want to miss. So go ahead, click on the link and step into the world where learning knows no boundaries. Till then, keep enjoying. I'll see you in the next video.